The cold, stiff fingers of Special Agent Elena Vance were the first thing Jaxson Ghost Reed felt through the rotting oak leaves, a sight that turned his blood to ice faster than the Montana wind. He had promised to find her, but as his canine, Bane, let out a hollow, mourning howl, Jaxson realized he was kneeling over a grave he was meant to prevent. If you believe that justice should never stay buried, please hit that subscribe button right now. Stay with me until the very end of this journey, and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this message of loyalty travels tonight. "Bane, stop!" Jaxson Reed barked, his voice cracking like a whip against the silence of the Bitterroot National Forest. The Belgian Malinois didn't stop. He was tearing at the earth, his massive paws sending frozen dirt and dead leaves flying. This wasn't a standard search and rescue alert. This was a frantic, desperate attempt to reach something the dog knew shouldn't be under the ground. "Is that her, boy? Is she there?" Jaxson whispered, dropping to his knees. His gloved hands joined the dog's paws, pushing aside the heavy, wet foliage. He saw the sleeve first, the dark navy blue of an FBI windbreaker. Then he saw the hand. It was pale, frozen in a claw-like gesture, as if she had been trying to grab the air one last time. Jaxson reached out, his fingers trembling as he touched the wrist. There was no pulse. There was only the bone-deep chill of a body that had surrendered to the mountain hours ago. "Damn it! Elena, I told you to wait!" Jaxson roared into the empty woods. He slumped back, his chest heaving. "I told her, Bane! I told her these people weren't playing by the rules!" Bane whined, a low, guttural sound of grief, and rested his heavy head on Jackson's shoulder. They had been tracking her for 36 hours, following a trail of blood and broken branches that led straight to this nightmare. "Ghost, this is dispatch. Do you have eyes on the target?" The radio on his tactical vest chirped, the sound jarringly loud. Jaxson stared at the hand under the leaves. "I have her, dispatch. But you need to send the coroner and tell Director Miller. Tell him he got what he wanted. She's gone." "Copy that, Ghost. Stay at your coordinates. A recovery team is 10 minutes out." Jaxson frowned. 10 minutes. They were in the middle of a restricted sector. No one could get a bird or a ground team here in 10 minutes, unless they were already waiting nearby. "Bane, did you hear that?" Jaxson muttered, his SEAL instincts screaming. "They're too close." The dog's ears flattened. He turned his head away from the body, sniffing the air toward the northern ridge. He didn't bark. He gave a sharp, directional puff of air, a silent alert. "Someone's watching us," Jaxson whispered. He didn't look up. He kept his head down, pretending to grieve over the body, while his eyes scanned the tree line. "They didn't kill her and leave, boy. They used her as bait." Suddenly, Bane lunged, not toward the ridge, but toward the body itself. He grabbed the FBI jacket with his teeth and pulled with all his might. "Bane! What are you doing? Leave her be!" Jaxson grabbed the dog's harness. But Bane growled, a sound he only made when Jaxson was walking into a trap. The dog ripped the jacket upward, and Jaxson froze. Under the fabric, there was no torso. There was a pressurized canister of VX nerve gas rigged to a mercury tilt switch. The hand he had touched wasn't Elena's arm. It was a realistic prosthetic wired to the trigger. "Back! Get back!" Jaxson screamed, grabbing Bane by the handle and throwing both of them down the steep embankment just as the canister hissed. They tumbled through the briars, Jaxson using his body to shield the dog as they crashed into a shallow creek. He scrambled to pull his gas mask from his thigh rig, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Dispatch! The site is hot! It's a trap! Repeat, the recovery site is a chemical trap!" Silence. The radio didn't even static. It was dead. "They jammed us," Jaxson gasped, checking Bane for injuries. They didn't just want her dead. They wanted the tracker dead too. He looked back up the slope. The white gas was settling in the hollow, a lethal fog that would kill anything with a heartbeat in seconds. But through the mist, he saw a figure moving. Not a rescue worker. A man in a high-end charcoal tactical suit, wearing a full-face respirator. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Reed," the man shouted, his voice muffled by the mask. "Miller said you were good, but you're just another dog chasing his tail." "Who are you?" Jaxson yelled back, drawing his sidearm. "Where is Agent Vance?" "She's exactly where she needs to be." The assassin laughed, leveling a suppressed submachine gun. "Under the leaves! You just picked the wrong pile." The assassin opened fire. The creek bed exploded in a spray of water and mud. Jaxson rolled, dragging Bane behind a fallen hemlock. "Bane, flank left! Go!" The Malinois vanished into the ferns, a brown and black blur. Jaxson popped up, firing 2 rounds to suppress the shooter. He didn't wait to see if he hit. He ran. He knew these woods better than any hitman. "You think you can hide?" The assassin's voice echoed. "We have thermal, Reed. There's nowhere to go." Jaxson slid into a narrow rock crevice, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He needed to think. If the body was a decoy, Elena might still be alive. But why go through the effort of a decoy? To see if I'd call it in, Jaxson realized, his eyes widening. They wanted to confirm the FBI radio frequencies I was using. He felt a cold vibration in his pocket. It wasn't his radio, and it was the burner phone Elena had given him weeks ago. A single text message sat on the screen. "Don't look for the body. Look for the silence. 44.5 minus 113.8. Bring the dog." "She's alive," Jaxson breathed. "Bane! To me!" The dog appeared at his side, panting but unharmed. Jaxson looked at the coordinates. They were 3 miles deeper into the dead zone, a canyon so steep that satellite coverage was non-existent. "Reed! I can smell your fear!" The assassin was closer now, the crunch of his boots on the frozen ground rhythmic and steady. "You smell your own end, pal," Jaxson whispered. He waited until the man was 10 feet away, separated only by a thin screen of pine branches. Jaxson didn't use his gun. He grabbed a heavy branch and threw it toward the creek. The assassin spun, firing a burst toward the noise. In that second, Jaxson lunged from the crevice. He slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, the force of the Navy SEAL's weight sending both of them sprawling. The assassin tried to bring his weapon up, but Bane was there. The dog locked onto the man's forearm, his jaws a vice. The man screamed, a raw, muffled sound behind his mask. Jaxson ripped the respirator off the man's face. "Who sent you? Was it Miller?" Jaxson demanded, his knee pinned into the man's throat. The assassin's face was turning purple. He choked out a wet laugh. You're too late, Reed. Even if you find her. She's already been buried." "Where?" "The old silver mine, at the bottom of the canyon, the silence. It's the only place she fits." The man suddenly bit down on his own tongue. A second later, his eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. "Cyanide. She professional to the end," Jaxson muttered, checking the man's pockets. He found a high-frequency transponder. It was chirping. "They're tracking him," Jaxson realized. "Bane, we have to move. Now!" They sprinted through the darkness, the terrain becoming more treacherous with every yard. The slope turned into a sheer drop-off. Below them, the canyon was a black maw, silent and forbidding. "Look for the silence," Jaxson repeated Elena's words. He stopped at the edge of a cliff. Far below, he saw a single, unnatural glint of light, a reflection of the moon on a piece of metal. It was a ventilation pipe sticking out of the mountain. "That's it," Jaxson said. "But Bane, if we go down there, there's no coming back up without help." The dog looked at the canyon, then back at Jaxson. He barked once, a sharp, confident sound. Right, a loyalty over life. They began the descent, sliding down the shale slopes, their hands and paws bleeding from the sharp rocks. When they reached the bottom, the silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, no water, just the heavy scent of old earth and ozone. He reached the ventilation pipe. Near the base, he saw it. Another pile of leaves. But these weren't oak. These were maple leaves, brought here from the lower valley. "They buried her here too," Jaxson whispered, his heart sinking. He began to dig, his nails clawing at the dirt. This time, there was no prosthetic. He felt the warmth of a human neck. He felt a pulse. Weak, erratic, but there. "Elena," he choked out, pulling her head above the dirt. Her eyes snapped open, but they were glazed with fever and pain. She looked at Jaxson, then at Bane. She didn't smile. She grabbed Jackson's tactical vest and pulled him close to her lips. "The card," she rasped. "I swallowed it. Don't let them cut it out of me." Jackson's blood ran cold. He looked up at the rim of the canyon. A dozen red laser dots began to dance across the rocks around them. "Ghost." A new voice came over the dead air of his radio. It was Director Miller. "I told you to stay at your coordinates. Now, you've made this very complicated. We can't have you leaving that canyon with her, or what's inside her." Jaxson looked at Elena, then at his dog. He had one magazine left, no extraction plan, and the most powerful man in the FBI was about to level the canyon. "Bane," Jaxson said, his voice dropping into a deadly calm. "It's time to show them why they should have left the seal in the shadows." The cold realization of Director Miller's betrayal hung in the air like a death sentence, heavier than the canyon's suffocating silence. Jaxson felt the vibration of Elena's shallow, ragged breathing against his chest as he pulled her closer into the shadows of the ventilation pipe. Above them, the red laser dots vanished, replaced by the low, predatory hum of a high-altitude drone circling the rim. They weren't just being watched anymore. They were being targeted. "Bane, eyes on," Jaxson whispered, and the dog didn't need a second command. His body tense, a coiled spring of muscle and instinct facing the only entrance to their narrow sanctuary. "Jaxson, the card," Elena gasped, her fingers clutching his tactical vest so hard the fabric groaned. He knows. He knows I have the encrypted log. If he levels this canyon, the truth dies with us." "Nobody is dying today, Elena. Not on my watch," Jaxson snapped. But his mind was racing through 1,000 failed scenarios. He knew Miller. The man didn't leave loose ends, and he didn't care about collateral damage. The drone wasn't for surveillance. It was carrying Hellfire missiles. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a sharp, metallic clink from the top of the pipe. A small, black cylinder tumbled down, bouncing off the rusted iron. Jaxson didn't think. He lunged, kicking the object deeper into the hollow of the cave just as it erupted in a blinding flash of white light. "Flash bang!" he roared, shielding Elena's eyes. His own vision went white, a deafening ring drowning out the world. Through the haze, he felt a weight slam into his side. Not an assassin had fast-roped down the ventilation shaft, moving with a speed that spoke of Tier 1 training. Jaxson swung blindly, his fist connecting with a tactical helmet. He felt the jar run up his arm. The attacker didn't grunt. He just countered with a knee to Jackson's injured ribs. The pain was an explosion, a white-hot poker stabbing into his lungs. He fell back, gasping for air, as the assassin leveled a suppressed pistol at Elena's head. "Bane! Take him!" The Malinois didn't hesitate. He launched himself from the darkness, a 90-pound blur of teeth and fury. The dog's jaws locked onto the assassin's firing arm, the weight of the strike knocking the man off balance. The pistol discharged, the bullet ricocheting off the metal pipe with a shower of sparks. Jaxson scrambled to his feet, ignoring the agony in his side, and drove his combat knife into the gap in the assassin's body armor. The man slumped, his life escaping in a quiet hiss. Jaxson didn't celebrate. He grabbed the man's radio earbud. "Target confirmed. Deploying gas in the lower vents. Seal the exits." "They're gassing us out," Jaxson whispered, looking at the ventilation pipe. "Elena, we have to move deeper into the mine. It's the only way to find another air source." "I can't. My legs," she whimpered, her face ghostly in the faint glow of his tactical light. "The toxins. They're already in my blood, Jaxson." "Then I'm carrying you," he said, hoisting her up. He felt the warmth of her blood soaking into his AOR-1 camouflage. It was a terrifyingly familiar feeling, the weight of a comrade who was slipping away. He whistled low, and Bane moved to the front, so he's sniffing for the faint trail of fresh oxygen. They moved through the narrow, jagged tunnels of the old silver mine, the walls closing in like a tomb. Every few minutes, Jaxson felt the mountain shudder. Miller was dropping bunker busters on the rim, trying to cause a cave-in. He wasn't just trying to kill them. He was trying to bury the evidence under 1,000,000 tons of rock. "Wait!" Jaxson hissed, stopping dead. Bane had frozen, his hackles raised. Up ahead, a rhythmic tapping echoed through the stone. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. It was Morse code. It's a signal," Elena breathed, her head lolling against his shoulder. "That's Sarah, Special Agent Reeves. She's still out there." "Or it's another lure," Jaxson countered, his grip on his sidearm tightening. "Miller uses our own codes against us. He knows how we think." The tapping stopped. A voice, tiny and distorted, leaked through cracks in the ceiling. "Ghost? If you can hear this, don't go to the main shaft. Miller has a kill team waiting at the elevator. There's a drainage pipe leading to the eastern creek. It's narrow, but the canine can clear it. You have to get the card out, Jaxson. The director just signed the execution order for the entire investigative team." Jaxson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp mine air. "Sarah, how do I know it's you? Remember the rainy night in Kabul? The broken Humvee and the stray cat you tried to feed? You called me a sentimental fool." Jaxson closed his eyes for a split second. It was her. "We're at the lower junction. Elena is in shock. We need a medevac." "I can't get a bird in, Jaxson. Miller has the airspace locked down. You have to get to the creek. I have a vehicle hidden 2 miles downstream. Move!" The tunnel behind them groaned. A massive explosion rocked the mountain, sending a shower of dust and stone onto their heads. The dead zone was becoming a graveyard. Jaxson sprinted, his boots slipping on the slick shale, the weight of Elena and his gear threatening to snap his spine. "Almost there, boy! Find the water!" Bane barked, a sharp, urgent sound. He had found it. A narrow, rusted drainage pipe barely 2 feet wide. It was clogged with debris and dead leaves, the very thing that had been Elena's fake grave. Jaxson set her down, his hands shaking as he cleared the opening. "You first, Elena. Crawl. Don't stop until you feel the water." "I don't think I can, Jaxson. Everything is getting dark." "Look at me." He grabbed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You swallowed that card for a reason. You survived that hole for a reason. Don't you dare let that bastard win. Now move." She nodded weakly, sliding into the pipe. Bane followed, his large frame barely fitting through the metal tube. Jaxson was halfway in when he heard the sound of boots, dozens of them entering the junction behind him. "They're in the hole! Fire!" Bullets sparkled against the rim of the pipe. Jaxson felt a searing heat across his calf. He didn't scream. He kicked off the wall, sliding into the dark, wet tunnel. The smell of stagnant water and rust filled his nose. It was a tight, suffocating crawl. He could hear Elena's gasps ahead of him, the sound of her fingernails scratching against the metal. "Keep going, Elena. Don't look back." Suddenly, the pipe beneath them groaned. The mountain's collapse was accelerating. A massive shift in the rock above sent a crushing weight down on the drainage line. The metal began to buckle. "Jaxson, it's closing!" Elena screamed. The pipe was flattening, the iron screeching as it was crushed like a soda can. Jaxson saw the gap in front of him shrinking. He lunged forward, pushing Elena's boots with his head, forcing her through the narrowing space just as the ceiling of the pipe touched his back. "Go, Bane, pull her!" He was pinned. The weight was immense, pressing the air out of his lungs. He could hear the assassins reaching the entrance of the pipe behind him, their voices muffled but triumphant. He was a seal, a ghost, a man who had survived the worst the world had to throw at him. But now he was being crushed by the very mountain he had used for cover. "Jaxson!" Elena's voice came from the other side of the collapse. "Jaxson, give me your hand." "Take the card. Get to Sarah," he wheezed, the pressure on his chest making it impossible to draw a full breath. Tell her the seal stayed in the shadows." "No, I'm not leaving you." Through the tiny gap left in the mangled pipe, he saw a pair of yellow-green eyes. Bane. The dog wasn't leaving. He began to dig at the mud and rock blocking the exit, his paws a blur of desperate motion. The dog was howling, a sound of pure, unadulterated refusal. Behind Jaxson, a grenade clattered into the pipe. The metallic tink-tink-tink of the safety lever flying off was the loudest sound he had ever heard. "Elena, run!" The explosion didn't kill him. It did something worse. The force of the blast in the confined space blew the blockage forward, throwing Jaxson through the gap and out into the icy waters of the creek. But the shock wave shattered the rest of the pipe, sealing the tunnel behind them forever. Jaxson tumbled into the freezing water, his vision spinning. He felt a wet tongue on his face. Bane was dragging him by his tactical vest toward the bank. He looked up, coughing out muddy water. Elena was slumped against a tree, her eyes wide with terror. They were out of the mine, but they were in the open, and high above, the drone's red eye finally found them. A small white flash appeared under the drone's wing. "Incoming!" Jaxson screamed, pulling Elena and Bane into the freezing water just as the first missile struck the bank, turning the night into an inferno of fire and flying stone. The hunt had moved from the shadows to the slaughter, and Miller was no longer pretending to follow the rules. Jaxson gripped Elena's hand, feeling the card still hidden within her, knowing that the next 60 seconds would decide if the truth would finally see the light or be burned into ash. The white-hot bloom of the Hellfire missile turned the icy creek into a boiling cauldron of steam and shrapnel, the shock wave slamming into Jackson's back like a freight train. He didn't have time to scream. He simply felt the world tilt as he shoved Elena and Bane deeper into the freezing sludge of the bank. Mud rained down on them, thick and smelling of scorched earth. But the silence that followed was even more terrifying. It was the silence of a predator recalculating its strike. "Elena, talk to me!" Jaxson choked out, his lungs burning from the heat. He felt her hand tighten on his shoulder, her nails digging through the fabric of his vest. I'm here. But the card... Jaxson, the data transfer in the mine. It didn't finish. Miller knows. He's not just trying to kill us now. He's trying to recover the physical copy. Jaxson rolled onto his side, his eyes stinging as he scanned the ridgeline. "Bane, stay low." The dog was already submerged to its chest in the water, its black ears twitching toward the sky. "He's going to orbit for another pass," Jaxson hissed, grabbing Elena's arm and dragging her toward a cluster of jagged rocks that offered the only overhead cover. "We have 30 seconds before that drone realigns its optics. Can you run?" Elena looked at her mangled leg, then back at the inferno where the drainage pipe used to be. "I'll crawl if I have to. Just don't let him take the card." They hadn't moved 10 yards when the air above them began to scream again. It wasn't the drone this time. It was the rhythmic, heavy thumping of a transport helicopter. "That's not a rescue bird," Jaxson muttered, his SEAL instincts recognizing the engine signature of a Black Hawk. "Miller's ground team is coming to finish the job." He pulled Elena into a narrow crevice between two boulders, pressing his body against hers to hide their thermal signatures. "Bane, down!" The dog flattened itself into the shadows, a silent sentinel of fur and fury. "Jaxson, look," Elena whispered, pointing a trembling finger toward the creek. A team of 6 men in ghost-gray tactical gear hit the ground from fast ropes, their movements surgical and cold. They didn't call out. They moved in a perfect diamond formation, their suppressed rifles sweeping the bank with infrared lasers. Jaxson watched the red beams dance across the rocks just inches from his head. He was out of ammo, his primary weapon lost in the pipe, and his only hope was a combat knife and a dog that would die for him. "They're using biosensors," Jaxson realized, his heart hammering against his ribs. "They'll find our heartbeats in minutes." "Then we give them something else to find," Elena said, her voice suddenly sharp with a desperate clarity. She reached into her medical kit and pulled out a pair of emergency flares. "If I can draw them toward the old mine entrance, you and Bane can get to the high ground. Sarah is waiting at the ridge, Jaxson. You told me to survive. Now I'm telling you to finish this. No one is playing decoy, Elena. We move together or we don't move at all." Jaxson gripped her wrist, his eyes burning with a fierce protectiveness. "Bane, find the scent. Find Sarah." The dog looked at the ridge, then back at the tactical team closing in. He let out a low, vibrating growl that vibrated through Jackson's boots. Suddenly, the lead assassin stopped. He lowered his rifle and tapped his headset. "Director, we have a secondary signature. It's moving north." "No, wait. It's splitting." Jaxson frowned. He hadn't moved. Elena hadn't moved. Then he saw it. A small, dark shape darting through the brush 50 yards to their left. It was a fox, panicked by the missile strike. The tactical team shifted their focus, their lasers tracking the animal. Now! Move! Jaxson hoisted Elena onto his back in a fireman's carry, his muscles screaming as he lunged up the steep, shale-covered slope. Every step was an agony of sliding rock and gasping breath. He could hear the heavy thud of boots pivoting behind them. They'd realized the fox was a fluke. "Contact! 10 o'clock! High slope!" a voice roared from below. A hail of suppressed fire stitched the trees around Jackson's head, bark spraying into his eyes. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He scrambled over a ledge, his fingers bleeding as he clawed at the frozen earth. "Jaxson! Drop me! You're too slow with the extra weight!" Elena pleaded, her voice breaking. "Take the card and go!" "Shut up and hold on!" Jaxson snarled, his vision blurring from the exertion. He reached the entrance of a secondary shaft, a narrow, forgotten hole in the mountain. He practically threw Elena inside and spun around, drawing his knife as the first assassin crested the ledge. The man didn't have time to raise his rifle. Jaxson slammed into him, the two of them tumbling back toward the edge. It was a brutal, silent struggle of knees and elbows. Jaxson felt a rib snap, but he didn't let go. He drove his knife into the gap in the man's tactical vest, feeling the hot spray of blood against his hand. As the man went limp, Jaxson grabbed his radio. "Team 2, we've lost lead. Target is lethal. Requesting immediate gas dispersal on the upper ridge." "They're going to choke the mountain," Jaxson gasped, crawling back to the shaft. "Elena, we have to get to the summit. It's the only place the wind is strong enough to clear the gas." But as he reached for her, he saw the look of pure horror on her face. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Bane. The dog was standing at the edge of the cliff, his nose pointed toward the valley. A second Black Hawk was rising from the mist, its side-mounted minigun spinning up. "Jump!" Jaxson screamed, lunging for Elena. The world turned into a chaotic blur of lead and splinters. The minigun chewed the ledge to pieces, the roar of the weapon drowning out everything. Jaxson felt a searing pain in his shoulder as he tumbled into the darkness of the shaft, pulling Elena with him. They fell for what felt like an eternity, crashing through rotted wooden supports until they hit a pool of stagnant, icy water at the bottom. "Bane! Bane!" Jaxson scrambled to his feet, his heart nearly stopping. A heavy splash echoed through the dark. The dog paddled toward them, his head barely above water, his breathing heavy and ragged. He was limping, his shoulder matted with blood. "You're okay, boy. You're okay," Jaxson whispered, pulling the dog onto a dry slab of rock. "Jaxson, the card," Elena wheezed, her hand over her stomach. It's not just data. It's a location. Miller isn't just selling secrets. He's building a private army in the dead zone. That's why he can't let us out. We're standing on top of his central hub." Jaxson looked around the dark cavern. This wasn't just a silver mine. In the faint glow of his emergency light, he saw thick fiber-optic cables running along the ceiling. He saw industrial-grade ventilation fans. "He's been using the mine as a front for a shadow command center," Jaxson realized. "Elena, we're not just trying to escape anymore. We're inside his heart. If we can find the mainframe, we don't need Sarah's transport. We can broadcast the evidence directly to every terminal in the FBI. But the gas," she coughed, the air in the shaft already becoming heavy with a sweet, chemical scent. "He's pumping it into the vents. We have 10 minutes before our lungs shut down. Then we make those 10 minutes count." Jaxson hoisted her up, his face set in a grim mask of determination. "Bane, find the air. Find the fans." The dog struggled to his feet, his loyalty overriding his agony. He led them deeper into the labyrinth, past rows of humming servers and steel-reinforced doors. They reached a central hub, a room filled with flickering monitors and the cold blue light of a dozen mainframes. Jaxson didn't know how to hack, but he knew how to destroy. "Elena, do your thing," he said, setting her down at the main console. Her fingers flew across the keys, her eyes reflecting the scrolling lines of code. "I'm in, but it's encrypted. I need your biometric ID from the SEAL database to bypass the federal firewall. If I do this, Miller will know exactly where we are. He'll drop the whole mountain on our heads." "Do it," Jaxson commanded, his hand on Bane's head. "Let him know we're here. Let him know the ghost is at his throat." The screen turned red. "Upload initiated. 20%. Suddenly the monitors shifted. Director Miller's face appeared, his expression one of cold, detached amusement. "You really are a glutton for punishment, Reed. You saved her from the leaves only to bury her in steel. I've already authorized a localized thermobaric strike. In 5 minutes, this entire mountain will be a puddle of molten rock. You've lost." "Maybe," Jaxson said, his voice dropping into a register of pure, lethal intent. "But the upload is at 30%, and every second you spend talking to me is a second you're not stopping it. See you in hell, Director." He smashed the monitor with his fist, the glass shattering. "Elena, how much longer?" 4 minutes, she whispered, her forehead resting against the console. "Jaxson, look at the secondary sensor. There's something else in the shaft. It's not gas. It's a remote detonation charge. He's not waiting for the strike. He's blowing the supports now." The floor beneath them groaned. A crack appeared in the ceiling, dropping a ton of stone onto the server racks. The mountain was screaming. Jaxson grabbed Elena and Bane, his eyes darting for an exit. But the only way out was up the ventilation shaft, the same shaft that was currently raining fire and debris. "Jaxson, go! Please save the dog!" Elena pushed him away, her face streaked with tears and soot. "The card! The upload! It's all that matters!" "I don't leave people behind!" Jaxson roared, grabbing a fallen cable and looping it around his waist. He hooked the other end to Bane's harness and Elena's belt. "We're going up! Now!" As the first explosion rocked the server room, Jaxson began to climb, his fingers digging into the metal ribs of the vent. The heat was rising, the smell of ozone and death filling the air. He could feel the mountain shifting, the very earth trying to crush them one last time. He looked up, seeing a tiny circle of moonlight at the top of the shaft. It was so far away, a mocking glimmer of hope in a world of fire. But as he reached for the next rung, a hand reached down from the darkness above, a hand wearing a tactical glove he didn't recognize. "Take it, ghost!" a voice barked. Jaxson froze. Was it Sarah? Or was it the last man Miller had sent to finish them? He looked at Elena, then at Bane, and then he reached for the hand, knowing that the next second would either be their salvation or the final twist of the knife. The hand reaching down from the lip of the ventilation shaft wasn't Sarah's, and it wasn't a rescue worker's. It was encased in a glove stained with the same charcoal dust that coated Jackson's own hands. "Grab on, Ghost! The whole damn ridge is about to blow!" Sarah's voice finally broke through the roar of the fire, but she wasn't alone. She had bypassed the federal blockade by stealing a civilian transport, her eyes bloodshot and her tactical gear shredded. Jaxson didn't hesitate. He shoved Elena upward, his muscles tearing as he hoisted her toward Sarah's grip, while Bane scrambled up the metal rungs with a desperate, scratching tenacity. "I've got her! Jaxson, give me your hand!" Sarah screamed, her voice barely audible over the screeching of the mountain's structural failure. But as Jaxson reached up, the server room below them finally succumbed to the thermobaric charge. The explosion didn't just shake the mountain, it turned the ventilation shaft into a vertical wind tunnel of fire. Jaxson felt the heat sear the back of his neck, the oxygen being sucked out of his lungs in a single, agonizing gasp. "Go, pull them up!" he roared, using his last ounce of strength to shove Sarah's hand away so she wouldn't be dragged down by his weight. He fell back a few feet, his fingers catching a jagged piece of rebar, just as the shaft floor vanished into a lake of molten slag. He was hanging over hell, watching the blue light of the mainframes disappear into orange chaos. "Jaxson, no!" Elena's scream echoed from above, but Sarah was already dragging her toward the exit. She knew the math of survival. She knew that if they stayed, 3 people died instead of 1. "Bane, go with them!" Jaxson looked up, seeing the dog's snout poking over the edge, a mournful, high-pitched whine vibrating through the metal. The dog didn't move. He barked, a sharp, commanding sound that Jaxson had only heard during the most brutal raids in Ramadi. It wasn't a goodbye. It was an order. Bane dropped his heavy tactical leash down the shaft, the weighted end hitting Jackson's shoulder. It was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot, a piece of nylon webbing hanging between life and a fiery grave. Jaxson grabbed it, wrapping the cord around his wrist until it cut into the bone. "Pull, boy, pull!" Above, the dog dug his paws into the frozen earth of the ridge, his muscles bunching with a strength that defied biology. Sarah joined in, grabbing the leash and hauling with a primal scream of defiance. Jaxson felt himself being dragged upward, his boots scraping against the red-hot metal of the vent. He cleared the lip of the shaft, just as a secondary explosion sent a pillar of flame 50 feet into the night sky. He collapsed onto the snow, gasping for air that didn't taste like ozone and death. You crazy son of a—" Jaxson choked out, his hand finding Bane's head. The dog licked the soot off his face, his tail giving a single, exhausted thump against the ice. "We have to move now!" Sarah didn't give them a second to breathe. She pointed toward the valley where the lights of 3 black SUVs were racing toward the base of the ridge. Miller's ground team realized the mine is a loss. They're coming for the survivors. He's declared this a national security sanitization zone. That means no witnesses, Marcus. Not even the FBI agents he used to work with. She helped Elena into the back of a battered, mud-caked truck. "The upload. Elena, did it finish?" Elena looked at the cracked screen of her tablet, her fingers trembling. 92%. The fire destroyed the local uplink. It's stalled, Jaxson. It's sitting on a ghost server waiting for a handshake from a secure terminal. If we don't get to a federal relay point in the next 20 minutes, the data packet will self-destruct to prevent interception. Jaxson looked at the road, then back at the ridge. Miller's men were already setting up a perimeter. They were boxed in. "The relay at the ranger station," Jaxson said, his voice dropping into a cold, tactical register. "It's on an independent satellite loop. If we can get there, we can push the button." "That station is 5 miles away through a kill zone," Sarah countered, slamming the truck into gear. "And they have air support. As if on cue, the predatory hum of the drone returned, its spotlight cutting through the forest like the eye of a vengeful god. The beam swept over the truck, and a second later, the earth 10 yards behind them erupted. "He's ranging us!" Sarah roared, floorboarding the accelerator. The truck fishtailed on the icy track, ditchy branches screaming against the windows. Jaxson grabbed his sidearm, checking the chamber. 1 round. He looked at Elena, who was clutching her side, her face drained of color. "Jaxson, if we don't make it, tell them what happened under the leaves," she whispered, her voice barely a thread. "Tell them I didn't quit." "You're going to tell them yourself," Jaxson snapped, but his heart was heavy. He knew the odds. He looked at Bane, who was staring out the rear window, his low growl never ceasing. Suddenly, the dog's ears went flat. He barked twice, a directional alert. "Left! Sarah, hard left!" Jaxson screamed. A missile slammed into the road exactly where they would have been, the blast flipping the truck onto 2 wheels before it slammed back down with a bone-jarring thud. The engine sputtered, smoke pouring from the hood. "The radiator's blown!" Sarah shouted, fighting the steering wheel. "We're not going to make the station! Get as close as you can!" Jaxson leaned out the window, firing his single shot at the drone's optical sensor as it dipped low for a visual confirmation. It was a desperate, impossible shot, but the bullet grazed the housing, causing the spotlight to flicker and veer off into the trees. It bought them seconds. The truck died 100 yards from the ranger station, skidding into a snowbank. "Out! Everybody out!" Jaxson hauled Elena out, her weight a crushing burden on his fractured ribs. They scrambled toward the small wooden cabin, the only structure for miles. Inside, the station was empty, the radio equipment humming in the corner. Elena collapsed into the chair, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Connecting. Come on. Handshake. Handshake." The progress bar flickered. 93%. 94%. Outside, the sound of the SUVs arrived, the screech of tires and the heavy thud of doors. Miller wasn't hiding anymore. His voice came through the station's emergency megaphone, cold and amplified. "Dalton, Reeves, you're protecting a traitor and a lie. Hand over the drive and walk away? This is your only warning." "He's stalling for the drone to reload," Jaxson whispered, barricading the door with a heavy oak desk. "Sarah, take the window. Bane, stay with Elena." He looked at the screen. 96%. How much longer? 2 minutes, but they're jamming the local frequency, Elena cried out, her eyes wide with panic. "I need a clear line of sight to the satellite. Someone has to manually realign the dish on the roof." Jaxson didn't hesitate. He grabbed a flare and a combat knife. "Keep that bar moving." He kicked open the back window and climbed onto the roof, the wind trying to rip him off the shingles. He saw the dish, twisted by the storm. Below him, Miller's men were moving in a tactical stack toward the front door. He grabbed the metal arm of the dish, his skin freezing to the iron. With a roar of agony, he wrenched it back toward the northern sky. "Now, Elena, do it!" A red laser dot appeared on Jackson's chest. He looked down, seeing Director Miller standing by the lead SUV, a sniper rifle leveled at his heart. "You were a good soldier, Reed," Miller said, his voice calm over the wind. "But you forgot the first rule of the shadows. The shadows belong to me." Miller pulled the trigger. Jaxson felt the impact, a hammer blow to his shoulder that spun him off the roof. He tumbled into the snow, the world turning gray. He heard a door burst open. He heard Bane's roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated protective fury. Then, the sound of a single, high-pitched chime from inside the station. The upload was complete. The truth was no longer in the canyon. It was in every newsroom in the country. But as Jaxson looked up through the red haze of his own blood, he saw Miller walking toward him, the rifle barrel pointed at his head. "The data is out, Miller," Jaxson wheezed, a bloody smile on his lips. "You're done." "The data is out," Miller whispered, leaning down. "But you're still under the leaves, Ghost, and dead men don't get to testify." He began to squeeze the trigger, but a shadow erupted from the station window, a blur of tan and black that hit Miller with the force of a landslide. It was Bane. Shoo, the dog didn't go for the arm. He went for the throat, his jaws locking onto the director's neck guard as they tumbled into the dark. Jaxson tried to move, but his body wouldn't obey. He watched the struggle, the man and the beast, until a new set of headlights crested the hill. Not black SUVs, but the white and blue of a state police convoy. Their sirens a beautiful, screaming symphony of justice that arrived just as Jackson's world finally went black. The cold weight of the snow against Jackson's face was the only thing keeping him from slipping into the final darkness as the sirens of the state police convoy wailed like a choir of angels. He tried to lift his head, his vision swimming in a sea of red and gray, but the strength had been drained from his limbs by the sniper's round. "Bane, get back," he wheezed. But the dog didn't listen. Bane was a whirlwind of primal justice, his teeth locked into Miller's shoulder, dragging the man away from the rifle. Miller was screaming, his professional mask shattered into a million pieces of raw, pathetic terror. The director of the FBI was being hunted by the very loyalty he had tried to exploit, and for a second, Jaxson felt a grim sense of peace. "Freeze! Hands in the air! Hands in the air now!" The command didn't come from Miller's men. It came from a dozen rifles held by men in state trooper uniforms. Sarah Reeves was the first one out of the station door, her weapon leveled at the chaos. She didn't look at Miller. She ran straight for Jaxson, sliding into the snow beside him. "Jaxson, stay with me! You hear me? The upload is done!" Every server at the DOJ just lit up like a Christmas tree. She was crying, her hands shaking as she pressed a bandage into his shoulder. Jaxson looked at her, then at Elena, who was being carried out by two troopers. Elena gave him a weak, bloody thumbs up. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic crack echoed through the clearing. One of Miller's remaining loyalists, hidden in the tree line, fired a final, desperate shot. The bullet didn't hit Jaxson. It hit the propane tank attached to the side of the ranger station. "Get down!" Sarah tackled Jaxson just as the tank ignited. The explosion was a wall of orange heat that knocked everyone to the ground. In the confusion, Miller managed to kick Bane away and scramble toward the lead SUV. He wasn't going to surrender. He was going to run. He slammed the door and floored it, the tires screaming as he bypassed the police blockade. "He's getting away!" Elena screamed from the stretcher. "He has the secondary drive in that vehicle. If he reaches the border, he can wipe the cloud back up." Jaxson felt a surge of adrenaline that defied his injuries. He looked at Bane. The dog was bleeding from a gash on his flank, but his eyes were fixed on the fleeing SUV. "Not today," Jaxson growled. He grabbed Sarah's keys from her belt and crawled toward her truck, the one with the blown radiator that was still coughing life. "Jaxson, you're hit. You can't drive," Sarah yelled, but he was already in the seat. Bane leaped through the broken window, landing in the passenger side with a snarl. The chase was a blur of white snow and black asphalt. Jaxson drove with one hand, the other clamped over his bleeding shoulder. He could see Miller's taillights disappearing into the mountain pass. Miller was heading for the Devil's Slide, a narrow, unguarded cliff road that led straight to the Canadian line. "He thinks he can disappear," Jaxson whispered to Bane. "He forgot who taught him how to track." Jaxson pushed the truck to its absolute limit, the engine screaming in protest. He wasn't gaining fast enough. Then he saw it, a shortcut, a narrow deer trail that cut across the switchback. It was a suicide jump. He looked at Bane. "Hold on, boy." He yanked the wheel, sending the truck flying off the embankment. They were airborne for a heartbeat, a terrifying silence before the truck slammed onto the lower road, directly in front of Miller's SUV. The collision was a symphony of grinding metal. Miller's vehicle swerved, hitting a rock and flipping onto its side, sliding toward the edge of the cliff. Jackson's truck died for good, the steering column pinning his legs. He watched as Miller crawled out of the shattered sunroof, his face a mask of blood and glass. Miller stood at the edge of the precipice, the secondary drive clutched in his hand. He looked at Jaxson, his eyes filled with a manic, hollow laughter. "You think you won, Reed? I'll drop this into the abyss. No drive, no conviction. It's my word against a dead agent's files." "It was never about the drive, Miller," Jaxson shouted, dragging himself out of the wreck. He stood on his one good leg, leaning against the door. "It was about the leaves. You buried her like she was nothing. You treated people like trash, and trash always gets picked up." Miller sneered and stepped back, his heel dangling over the 1,000-foot drop, when he raised the drive to throw it. But he froze. From the shadows of the pines behind him, a dozen figures emerged. Not police, not SEALs. They were the families of the agents Miller had sanitized over the last decade. People Sarah Reeves had been quietly gathering for years. They didn't have guns. They had cameras. Thousands of live streams were pointed directly at him. The world wasn't just watching the data. They were watching the man. "Drop it, Miller." Sarah's voice came from the road behind Jaxson. She had arrived with the convoy. "The hand is played out. Even your friends in D.C. have already issued a statement disowning you. You're a ghost now, the kind that doesn't get to come back." Miller looked at the crowd, then at the drive, then at Jaxson. He realized the truth. His power hadn't come from the secrets he held, but from the fear that people wouldn't believe they existed. Now everyone knew. He let the drive fall from his fingers. It didn't hit the bottom. It caught on a branch, dangling just out of reach. Miller slumped to his knees, the fight finally leaving his body. Jaxson felt the strength leave him too. He collapsed back into the snow, Bane sitting heavily beside him. Sarah ran to him, but Jaxson just watched as the troopers moved in to put Miller in irons. He looked at the sky, the first light of dawn finally breaking over the Montana ridges. It was a cold, hard light, but it was honest. "Is it over?" Elena asked, appearing at his side, supported by a medic. "No," Jaxson said, looking at the dog who had saved his life a dozen times in one night. "But for the first time in 10 years, the shadows are just shadows again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dried maple leaf he had picked up from Elena's second grave. He handed it to her. "Keep this, to remind you that even when they bury you, you're just a seed." Elena took the leaf, her tears finally falling. She looked at the convoy, at the truth spreading across the globe, and at the man and the dog who had refused to give up on her. The silence of the mountain was no longer a threat. It was a sanctuary. Jaxson Reed had spent his life as a ghost, but as the sun rose, he realized he didn't want to hide anymore. He had found something more powerful than a secret mission. He had found the courage to be seen. The hunt was finished, the traitors were in chains, and the girl who was buried under the leaves had become the light that exposed the dark. Jaxson closed his eyes, listening to the steady, rhythmic breathing of his faithful K9, knowing that some bonds are forged in fire and cannot be broken by any man or any mountain. Justice had arrived, not through the strength of an empire, but through the loyalty of a dog and the iron will of a man who refused to leave a sister behind. The truth was no longer buried. It was the ground they stood on.